30 minutes before the biggest moment of my life. The air in the green room felt electric. I was about to walk onto a stage in San Francisco and launch Neuralink, a company valued at over $4 billion. I adjusted my microphone, ready to change the world. That was when a catering staff member slipped into the room. He didn't offer me water. He dropped a heavy manila envelope onto my vanity and muttered 3 words. "You have been served." I opened the seal. It wasn't a congratulations card. It was a lawsuit. The plaintiffs were David and Susan, the parents I hadn't seen in 18 years. They weren't suing for love. They were demanding $15 million for retroactive child-rearing fees and genetic licensing. They actually claimed my intelligence was their intellectual property. If you suddenly became successful, do you think the people who ignored you would come back for a slice of the pie? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. My hands didn't shake. I wish they had. Shaking would have been a normal reaction. Instead, I went absolute zero. That document wasn't just a legal threat. It was a portal back to the night my life actually started. 18 years ago. The night of the big storm. I was 10 years old. The wind was tearing shingles off our roof, and the power had been out for 6 hours. Inside, the air smelled like damp wool and fear. My Aunt Teresa sat in her wheelchair by the window, staring at the rain. She had been paralyzed in a car accident just 3 months prior. The insurance company had finally mailed the settlement check that week, $500,000. It was supposed to buy a handicap-accessible van, pay for physical therapy, and maybe, just maybe, get us out of that rotting house. I remember watching David and Susan packing the car. They were moving fast, frantic, throwing suitcases into the trunk of the only vehicle we owned. David looked at me, his eyes glassy and hard. He told me they were driving to the city to deposit the check and set up a specialist appointment for Teresa. He said it was urgent. He said they would be back by morning. I watched their taillights fade into the driving rain. They didn't come back by morning. They didn't come back for 3 days. By the time the storm broke, we had no electricity, no food in the fridge, and I was melting snow on the radiator to give Teresa water. They had taken the car. They had taken the clothes. And most importantly, they had taken the check. They left a paralyzed woman and a 10-year-old child to die in the dark. People always ask me why we didn't call the police right then, why we didn't hunt them down. They ask because they have never known the suffocating weight of the survivor's invisible chain. When you are that poor, when you are literally counting grains of rice to decide if you eat dinner or save it for breakfast, you don't have the luxury of anger. You only have the capacity for survival. We were terrified that if we made noise, if we called authorities, they would split us up. They would put me in foster care and put Teresa in a state home where she would rot. So we stayed silent. We existed in a state of perpetual panic, terrified of returning to zero. The fear of poverty acted as a cage. It kept our heads down. It made us focus on the next hour, the next dollar, the next meal. We didn't have the bandwidth for revenge. We only had the bandwidth to breathe. David and Susan knew that. They banked on it. They spent 18 years thinking that the silence from our end was submission. They thought the chain was still around my neck. I looked up from the lawsuit, staring at my reflection in the vanity mirror. The 10-year-old girl who melted snow to survive was gone. They weren't suing a victim. They were suing a shark. I handed the lawsuit to Aunt Teresa. She didn't gasp. She sits in a custom-engineered titanium wheelchair now, the kind that costs more than the house we used to starve in. She isn't just my aunt anymore. She is the CFO of Neuralink. She scanned the document with the same cold precision she uses to audit our quarterly projections. She saw exactly what I saw. It wasn't a legal claim. It was an invoice for an 18-year-old debt they thought we owed them for existing. We didn't waste time mourning the loss of a childhood. We engineered a new one. I spent my teenage years diving into electronic waste bins behind tech startups. Not for fun, but for parts. The public library became my laboratory, while other kids were learning to drive. I was learning to code neural networks on a borrowed terminal. We turned hunger into ambition, and silence into strategy. Neuralink wasn't built in a garage. It was built in a shelter, line by line. Until we weren't just surviving anymore. We were the industry standard. We didn't ask for permission to succeed. We took it. The door to the green room flew open. My chief of PR didn't knock. He just turned a tablet around to face me. His face was pale. It was Tyler, the brother I hadn't seen since he was in diapers. He was live on TikTok. And there were 200,000 people watching. He wasn't working a job. He was working the camera. Tears streamed down his face, perfectly lit. Perfectly framed. She left us. Tyler sobbed into his microphone. My parents are sick. They spent every dime they had raising her, giving her the best education. And the moment she got rich, she ghosted us. She's not a visionary. She's a monster who abandoned her dying family. The comments section was a blur of red angry emojis and cancellation hashtags. Boycott Neuralink was already trending. I looked at the market monitor on the wall. The pre-IPO futures were flickering. They were dipping. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a coordinated strike. David and Susan knew they couldn't win in a courtroom with a frivolous lawsuit. They didn't want a judge. They wanted a settlement. They were holding my reputation hostage 20 minutes before the bell rang, betting that I would pay $15 million just to make the bad PR go away. Teresa looked up from the screen. Her eyes were dry. They think this is leverage, she said, her voice flat. It is, I replied, watching the viewer count climb to 250,000. But leverage works both ways. They wanted a public spectacle. They wanted to drag me into the mud. They didn't realize I had the receipts to bury them in it. My head of security asked if he should lock down the building. I told him to do the opposite. I told him to issue them all access passes and escort them directly to the VIP holding area behind the main stage. You don't trap a narcissist by building a wall. You trap them by opening a door and laying out a red carpet that leads straight off a cliff. David, Susan, and Tyler walked into the holding room like they owned the building. They didn't look like the desperate people who had fled a storm 18 years ago. They were polished. Susan was wearing Chanel. David had capped his teeth. They looked like success. It was easy to look successful when you were spending someone else's blood money. David didn't even say hello. He threw the lawsuit on the table between us. He told me that $15 million was a discount. He said I should be grateful. I looked at him and asked a simple question. I asked why he thought he deserved a penny of the fortune I built while he was gone. His answer was the most chilling thing I have ever heard. It wasn't about love, or care, or even raising me. It was about ownership. He tapped his chest and told me that my brain was just a remix of his code. He said that without his genetics, I would be nothing. He genuinely believed that because he provided the biological hardware, he owned the intellectual software. It is a specific kind of delusion found only in the deeply narcissistic. They view their children not as human beings, but as asset classes. In his mind, I wasn't a daughter who had been abandoned. I was a runaway investment that had finally matured. And he was simply here to collect his dividend. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. Arguing with a delusion only validates it. Instead, I slid a single document across the polished mahogany table. It was a standard liability waiver and broadcast consent form. But I had titled it Settlement Agreement and Release of Claims. I told them that if they signed it, I would bring them onto the stage immediately. I told them we would announce the reconciliation to the world. And the financial transfer would happen live, in front of the investors. To restore confidence in the stock. Greed is a blinder. It tunnels your vision until all you can see is the win. They didn't read the fine print. They didn't ask a lawyer to review the clauses about defamation or admission of guilt. They just saw the finish line. David uncapped a pen and signed his name with a flourish. Susan signed. Tyler signed. Still holding his phone. Probably planning his victory selfie. They thought they were signing a receipt for $15 million. They were actually signing a full legal release permitting me to broadcast their likeness, their words, and their past crimes on a global feed without fear of being sued for privacy violations. I stood up and smoothed my blazer. I told them it was time to go meet the world. They followed me toward the stage lights like wolves following a lamb. Completely unaware that they were walking into a slaughterhouse, the stage lights were blinding. 4,000 investors, tech journalists, and industry leaders sat in the darkened auditorium. Millions more were watching the live stream. The giant screen behind me displayed the Neuralink logo, pulsing with a soft blue light. I walked to the center mark. The applause was polite but hesitant. The stock was still down 4%. Tyler's whisper campaign had done its damage. They were waiting to see if the CEO was a monster or a genius. I didn't start with the product. I didn't talk about neural pathways or AI integration. I started with a story. I told them that Neuralink was founded on the principle that no one should be left behind. I told them that support is the architecture of survival. Then, I gestured to the wings. David, Susan, and Tyler walked onto the stage. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. They waved. They smiled. They looked like the perfect, supportive family. David stepped up to the microphone I had vacated. He didn't wait for an introduction. He seized the moment. He looked directly into the camera and launched into the performance of a lifetime. He spoke with a trembling voice about sacrifice. He told the world how he had worked 3 jobs to fund my education. He spoke about the sleepless nights worrying about my future. Susan wiped away a tear on cue. Tyler stood by them, nodding solemnly, projecting the image of the loyal brother who had held the family together while the prodigal sister ran off to play tech mogul. We gave her everything, David said, his voice cracking with rehearsed emotion. We emptied our retirement accounts. We sold our home. We did it all because we believed in her brilliance. And when she succeeded, she cut us off. She left us with nothing but debt and broken hearts. We don't want to hurt her company. We just want what is fair. We just want our daughter back. The crowd was shifting. I could feel the sympathy in the room tilting toward them. It was a masterclass in manipulation. They were weaponizing the universal fear of ungrateful children. They were painting a picture where I was the villain. And they were the martyrs who had been bled dry by my ambition. I stood in the shadows at the edge of the stage, watching them. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I let them talk. I let them stack lie upon lie until the tower was so high it was wobbling. I waited until David took a breath, looked at the audience with soulful eyes, and said, "We just want justice." I walked back to the podium. The microphone was live. "You want justice, David?" I asked, my voice echoing through the silent hall. "Let's give you justice." I looked up at the control booth and gave the signal. The giant screen behind me flickered. The pulsing blue Neuralink logo dissolved. The room went quiet. Not the respectful quiet of a church, but the vacuum quiet before an explosion. David turned to look at the screen. A confident smile still plastered on his face. Expecting to see a transfer confirmation or a settlement announcement, he didn't see a bank wire. He saw a timestamp, October 14th, 2006, 9:42 p.m. The footage was grainy, pulled from a neighbor's old security camera and digitally restored by my own tech. It showed a driveway in the rain. It showed a sedan with the trunk open. And it showed David and Susan. They weren't crying. They weren't hesitating. They were laughing. They were shoving suitcases into the back seat. Then, they got into the car. The brake lights flared red in the darkness. And then they drove away. The camera lingered on the house they left behind, a house with no lights on. A gasp rippled through the auditorium. It started in the front row and rolled back like a wave. "You said you sold the house to pay for my education," I said, my voice calm, amplified through the speakers. "But the foreclosure records show you stopped paying the mortgage 3 months before you left. You didn't sell it. You abandoned it with a 10-year-old and a paraplegic woman inside." Susan stepped back, her hand flying to her mouth. But I wasn't done. I clicked the remote in my hand. The screen changed again. This time, it was a forensic accounting spreadsheet. It was cold, hard, indisputable math. The header read, "Disability Insurance Settlement. Teresa Vance. 18 years ago. My aunt received a settlement of $500,000 after the accident that took her legs." I narrated, reading the numbers as they highlighted in red on the screen. It was money meant for surgeries, for ramps, for survival. I clicked again. A scanned bank transfer slip appeared. It was signed by David. "October 15th, the morning after you left us in the storm. You didn't go to a specialist. You went to the bank. You forged her signature and transferred the entire balance, $500,000, into a private account in the Cayman Islands." The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. David's face had drained of all color. He looked like a ghost. He looked at the exit. But security guards had quietly moved to block the stairs. I clicked again. And just so we are clear on the definition of sacrifice, photos flooded the screen. A split-screen comparison. On the left, a photo of me at age 11. Wearing a coat inside a public library because we had no heat. Doing homework on the floor. On the right, a photo of David and Susan on a boat in the Mediterranean. Dated 3 weeks after they left. They were tanned. They were holding cocktails. They were wearing the clothes bought with the money that was supposed to teach my aunt how to live in a wheelchair. Tyler, the brother who had just been crying about abandonment on TikTok, was in the photo too. He was a toddler, playing with a pile of new toys on the deck of a yacht. "You didn't invest in my future," I said, turning to face them. I wasn't shouting. I didn't need to shout. The data was screaming for me. "You stole the seed money that kept my aunt alive to pay for your tans. You stole her mobility to buy your leisure. And you spent 18 years waiting for me to build something valuable enough for you to come back and try to steal that too." The crowd turned. I saw it happen in real time. The pity that David had cultivated just minutes ago evaporated, replaced by a visceral, collective disgust. Investors were standing up. Journalists were typing furiously. The live light on the cameras was burning red, beaming their crimes to the entire world. David stammered, leaning into the microphone, sweat beading on his forehead. This is a misunderstanding. That money was... It was reimbursement. We signed a settlement. No. I corrected him. You signed a release form. You signed a document giving me the unrestricted right to broadcast your image and your history. You thought you were signing for a check. You were actually signing a confession. Susan grabbed David's arm, her knees buckling. The arrogance was gone. The golden facade had cracked wide open, revealing the rot underneath. They weren't parents. They were parasites who had finally been exposed to the light. I didn't say another word to them. I didn't have to. 2 officers stepped out from behind the curtain before David could even stutter another excuse. They didn't ask for ID. They had the forensic files I had sent over 3 hours ago. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the auditorium. Amplified by the microphone David was still gripping. David and Susan Vance, the officer said, his voice cutting through the stunned atmosphere. You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and identity theft. Susan started screaming. A high, thin sound that finally shattered her composed facade. David looked at me, his eyes wide with betrayal, as if I were the one who had broken the social contract. Tyler tried to back away, frantically tapping on his phone to delete the live streams. But the second officer blocked his path. He wasn't just a witness. The forensic audit showed the stolen funds had paid for his car, his college, and his lifestyle. He was a beneficiary of proceeds from a crime. They took his phone as evidence, as they were marched off the stage, dragged past the very investors they had tried to manipulate. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel happy. I felt light. The weight of 18 years. The phantom debt of my existence simply evaporated. I turned my back on them and faced the audience. The room was still reeling, but I walked back to the podium. Now that we have cleared the liabilities, I said, my voice steady, let's talk about the future. I pressed the button. The trading bell rang. The ticker symbol for Neuralink flashed on the massive screen. The numbers didn't dip. They didn't stall. They skyrocketed. We didn't just hit the $4 billion valuation. We smashed through it. The market didn't punish me for the drama. It rewarded me for the transparency. They saw a CEO who couldn't be blackmailed, who kept receipts, and who protected her assets. I walked over to Aunt Teresa. She was smiling. Really smiling. For the first time since the accident, I took the handles of her chair, and we walked off the stage together, leaving the empty space where my parents used to stand. We didn't look back at the police cruisers flashing outside. We didn't look back at the past. We had settled the account. If you had the receipts to take down the people who hurt you, would you use them publicly? Or walk away? Share this story if you believe in justice.